So welcome everybody to the Energy Changemakers live stream. I'm Elisa Wood. I'm the founder of Energy Changemakers. And as I said a few minutes ago, we are a platform that provides content and community for those working on the grid edge. And if this sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to subscribe to our free newsletter. The link is going to be in the chat. So we ran a story recently about a Western University study that identified places on the US grid where it makes economic sense to go off grid. And that story got a lot of attention. Last time I checked, it was the most read story on the site this year. So I am really happy to have with us today the two researchers, the authors of that paper from Western University, Ali Sadat and Joshua Pierce. And they are going to not only talk about research, but talk about apparently what they have found since then and also what's ahead. So Ali, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Elisa. So yeah, it's a great honor for me to present my study, and I would like to transit the presentation to Professor Pierce, so he would. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. It is an honor for be here. And we're going to talk a little bit about grid defection. So Ali, next slide, please. So I think most of you, or probably everybody on this call, is a little bit familiar with how the grid has operated in the past. And as the cost of distributed generation has gone down, whether we're talking about cogen or solar or even wind, that's changed how energy is going to be provided. The old model had large centralized electricity generation plants that kind of spiderwebbed out and provided service to everybody. And the model that utilities used for that is that they had to kind of guarantee power to everybody in their jurisdiction. And they used the kind of long leads, people living off in the wilderness, that would have been very expensive to provide electricity to. They were subsidized by kind of the major population centers. But as it's become less and less costly to generate your own electricity, their very own customers are threatening them by either offsetting some of their load or completely eliminating it. So we did a study in 2011, and I've been bouncing back and forth between the US and Canada basically since I've been an academic. And it was just as I was moving from Canada to the US for the first time back, we showed that in North America, both in Canada and in the US, photovoltaic power had finally reached grid parity. And what that meant is that you could generate electricity in your own home off a typical residential system for approximately the same price as the electricity you're buying it from the grid. It was very intriguing to see what happened with that result. So I literally published the study just as I moved across the border. And so it was the same study, it was the same person. I did a press release at both universities. In Canada, it made every single news source. Like I was on everything, every television show, every newspaper, everything. And in the US, I made the local paper for the university I was at, Michigan Tech, and I made the LA Times, and that was it. No one cared, or no one cared about the idea that solar was finally economic. So Ali, next slide. And so since 2011, the photovoltaic costs have continued to drop. They've been pushed down by about 90% in the last decade. The technologies have gotten far better. If any of you that have kind of maybe built your own system, 10 or 20 years ago, the inverters now, like we have smart inverters, we have smart maximum power point trackers. The solar panels themselves have gotten substantially more efficient, and all of that has pushed prices down. And then the other piece of it is that in the 10 years ago, let's say, you wouldn't even consider putting a battery on a PV system that was connected to the grid. It just made no sense whatsoever. Today, batteries in many locations make sense by themselves, let alone when you couple it with solar, because their costs have come down so far. And so what this means is that pretty much anywhere in the world now that gets a reasonable amount of sunlight, you can start to think about producing your own energy. So next slide, please. At the same time, because of aging infrastructure and just the cost of normal things increasing over time, and we've had a massive increase in demand as we start to electrify our transportation and more so electrifying homes. For example, in the last couple of years in the US, heat pumps are now more popular than kind of conventional natural gas furnaces. Like all of these things are pushing a large amount of demand on a kind of a somewhat limited infrastructure which is increasing prices. When you throw on the kind of normal stuff of inflation that we're all dealing with, you have the grid costs all going up while the renewable energy costs and distributed generation continue to drop. Next slide. And so you put all of this together, and it starts to represent a threat to people whose business model it is to encourage you to use more electricity so they can sell it to you if suddenly a substantive number of their consumers, of the people that they sell electricity to, are beginning to generate some on their own. And so it's just as bad as, say, getting high efficiency lighting in at your house. If you're starting to decrease the amount of electricity you're using, they're making less money. And in the, let's say a decade ago, we had what was called net metering. And although it was the law, it wasn't truly practiced. It was a very small fraction of the entire US actually had it. And the way net metering works is you generate electricity usually during the day, maybe more than you need, and that's fed onto the grid, and you get credits. And then at night, when your solar's not doing anything, you're pulling from the grid, and you can use those credits. And the optimal economic system that you would have for a net metered system would be something that generates just enough kilowatt hours over the year to cover your load. And so that's how most people size their systems. It was meant to kind of break even, because as in general, utilities wouldn't pay you for the electricity as a small residential consumer, but it was just to break even. All over the US, we've been seeing a major change in how net metering is evolving. And so in most places, it's not true net metering. It doesn't allow you to, for example, carry credits from month to month or from year to year. It doesn't. And what's really changing is the compensation model. And so net metering was popular because it was relatively easy for everybody to understand. If you're paying, let's say, 12 cents per kilowatt hour, and you generate a kilowatt hour, that should be worth 12 cents. Now, there's time of use where the price of electricity radically changes, and depending on what time it is. And some of the most sophisticated net metering models also use that. But what we're seeing more and more is if you generate electricity, you get, let's say 5 cents. And when you go to buy the electricity, they're charging you 20 cents. And so that seems intrinsically unfair to consumers. And so if you've already invested a substantial amount of money in buying a large-scale photovoltaic system, it only stands to reason they might look for other alternatives. And so instead of getting the 5 cents of electricity that you're going to get from the grid, maybe it makes more sense for the consumer to push that into a battery and use it themselves. The next slide, please. And so that brings us to this concept of utility death spirals. There was a really nice report of this a few years ago from the Rocky Mountain Institute, where they looked at where might we see such a thing. And that the idea of a utility death spiral is if the utility discourages photovoltaic generators to stay on the grid by doing something like having that differential price between what you're providing and what you're paying, then people will leave the grid. And when they do, that increases the cost for everybody that remains on the grid. And then more people might say, well, now the differential, like the return on investment for investing in an off-grid system, makes even more sense. So I'm going to do it. And as more and more people do it, you get this thing where the prices continue to go up. And then, we feel sorry for the people that are left kind of holding the bag at the end. And so that's called a utility death spiral. And to the best of my knowledge, that has never happened in the US all the way through. But the concept is there, and it represents a real risk. And the reason that this is so timely now is that all of these factors are moving in. That if utility rates are maintained the same way they are now, or continue to kind of go this direction of separating that, getting a bigger and bigger delta between what the value of the electricity that the homeowner is providing and what they're paying for electricity, it puts utilities in this kind of risky territory. Next. And so to figure out how big of a threat this really is, Ali and I did a study using a software package that he just developed. And so I'll turn this over to Ali to explain.
Thank you so much, Professor Pierce, for his insightful comment to the challenges of the current energy transition. So my name is Said Ali Sadat, and I would like to discuss about the solution to the challenges that Professor Pierce discussed. So our proposed solution is to use hybrid energy systems. Why we need to use hybrid energy systems? Because we cannot solely rely on the solar energy technology, as we cannot generate electricity during the nighttime. So we need something like battery so that we can store the energy during the daytime and then use that energy during the nighttime. Or we need some backup options like backup generators. So whenever solar energy generation is not enough, then we can use that backup generator. So we propose to use hybrid energy systems, and this hybrid energy system would provide greener energy, and it would increase the reliability for energy systems. And also the cost would be reduced using the hybrid energy systems. And for some people which are interested, it would provide energy independence. So to have a hybrid energy system, we need to design it. And to design this hybrid energy system, we need a software or a tool. A sophisticated tool in the literature is Homer Pro, which is really famous. But at the FAST Research Group, we have developed and we designed a novel and new software called SAMA, Solar Alert Multi-Objective Advisor. This software is a student-developed software which is a microgrid optimizer and can be used for designing hybrid energy systems. And the interesting point is that is as accurate as Homer Pro, and also it can provide more unique features compared to Homer Pro. So as a student developed software is as accurate as Homer Pro, and also it can have more new features compared to Homer, like we can simulate electric vehicles, or we can adopt some machine learning features, and also we can simulate heat pumps. So the SAMA would be really helpful for optimal sizing of hybrid energy systems, and also off-grid system feasibility analysis. And also it can assess the grid defection potential assessment. So SAMA is specifically tailored to assess the grid defection potential, which using a Homer Pro is not easy to do that. So using SAMA, it would be really helpful for the engineers, researchers, and policymakers to design their own hybrid energy systems, and they can have their own sustainable energy systems. And I would like to say that SAMA is currently being developed as a web tool and Windows and Linux application. So you can see the first insights of the web tool that we are currently developing. And this web tool has two types of modules. The first module is a general calculator module, which is for normal audiences, which they have the limited technical knowledge, and they can easily design their own energy system. And also we have advanced module, which is useful for researchers, and it would require more technical knowledge so that they can have more accurate results. And also we are developing the Windows application here, which is really user-friendly. And as you can see, the insights here, it would require a step-by-step procedure to ask the user the input parameters. And I would like to remind a memory that I have here. So I was talking with a researcher from UK, and he was saying that working with Homer is so difficult. I needed to take 10 hours of webinar in YouTube to be able to work with Homer and simulate my hybrid energy system and get accurate results. And I said to him, hopefully with SAMA, you can do that easily. You don't need to spend that much time. At most, you would need just 1 hour of the webinar to be able to do the software and get the accurate result. So in addition to the accuracy, the being a user-friendly software is also another objective of our team. So the surprise here is that as a student-developed software, SAMA is completely free and open source. So you would have access to a software which is free and open source, and also would bring you more unique feature compared to Homer Pro, which is paid software. You need to pay for that thousands of dollars per year for that software, and also is a closed source. So we would try to release the software in next 6 months, and so soon to be you can access the web tool and the Windows version of the software. And I would like to discuss about interesting results that we have achieved using the SAMA. So at the current stage, we noticed that grid defection at some specific states location across the uses is economically feasible right now. So we categorize grid defection cases into two main categories: grid defection cases and marginal grid defection cases. What are the grid defection cases? Grid defection cases are the cases that the life cycle cost of the optimal system designed by SAMA is less than life cycle cost of the being only on the grid. So if you are in the San Diego or San Francisco, so so having a system which is designed by SAMA would be more cost effective, would be more economic for you rather than being on the grid. And what are the marginal grid defection cases? These cases are the cases that the life cycle cost of the hybrid energy system designed by SAMA is almost same as life cycle cost of the being on the grid. So if you are in Los Angeles or Boston, and in the future utility companies in these cities are going to increase electricity prices just a little bit, or the price of the PV and battery technology is decreased, which is the current trend, then your cities can be also considered fully economic cases for the grid defection. So there are some main parameters which are promoting the grid defection. The first and foremost is that if you are in a solar-rich location, that can be considered a favorable parameter for grid defection. And another parameter is that if you are in a location which the electricity prices are expensive, then your location can be considered a favorable location for a grid defection. And these two parameters are tangled together. So totally, if you are in a city or a location which is solar rich, like San Diego in California, and then electricity prices are expensive, then your city, there is a great chance for that it's a favorable, fully economic grid defection case study. So totally, we have categorized the parameters that promote the grid defection. Then the first one is the geography. If you are in solar-rich location, and also another parameter if there is any economic incentives for renewable energy systems, like at the current, we know that there is an investment tax credit for the renewable energy systems, and that investment tax credit is really helpful for the off-grid systems, and it promotes the grid defection. Another interesting thing that I would like to discuss is the way that the rates are designed and the rate structures that are proposed by utilities. And these rates can also encourage people to defect from the grid. Utilities may not be aware about that the rates can encourage people to defect from them. But in our recent study, which is currently under review, we understand that defecting from the grid can be actually dependent on the rate structures that are proposed by the utilities. So utilities can design their rates in the way that discourage the people from disconnecting from the grid. And the policies that offered by the policymakers are also important. So net metering scheme should be more fair. The compensation rate should be more fair. If the compensation rate for the net metering is not going to be fair, so the user would defect from the grid because it would be more economic for them with the current technological advances. With the current technological advances, using photovoltaic, solar energy system, and batteries would be more economic. So I think the policymakers and the utilities should think about that, and they should have more incentives for the people to be on the grid, to remain on the grid, with reducing the cost and investing more on the renewable energies. And inflation is another parameter which is affecting the grid defection. If inflation in the future is going to increase, then the price of electricity can be increased, and then the people with have more willingness to defect from the grid. And some people may have some environmental and social perspectives to defect from the grid. Some people would like to have more greener energy systems, so they can have hybrid renewable energy systems to be more environmental friendly. And some people would like to have energy independence. So Because of that, they can have off-grid energy systems. For all of these purposes, SAMA can be helpful, or software designed at the FAST Research Group can be helpful for that. It could be helpful for the researchers, for the engineers and industry people, also for the policymakers to design the appropriate policies. So at the conclusion, defecting from the grid is not the easiest step. So there are some challenges on that, like the high initial capital costs, and there are some reliability concerns without proper backup systems. And also there is the risk of the death spirals from widespread defection. So totally utilities should try to balance the rate structures to retain the solar prosumers on the grid. And also they need to offer more incentives for the people to use hybrid renewable energy systems and offer more fair net metering compensation rate, as Professor Pierce mentioned. And the action item for them is that they have to proactively design strategies to encourage renewable energy adoption. And that should be their main goal. And if they are not going to do that, they would be in the main danger in the future. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. And if you have any question about our study or about the software, I would be more than happy to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua and Ali. That was a great presentation, and as somebody said in the chat, really nice slides too. Great content, great slides. So let's open this up to questions. Since there's quite a few of us here, it might be a good idea to raise your hand. And I believe you can now unmute yourself. So if you can't, let me know in the chat and I will figure out why. But I think you can all unmute yourself. What I'm not seeing, if anyone's raising their hand right now, for some reason I am. Okay, now they're coming through. They took a minute. Okay, Russell, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I just wrote it, but essentially what I'm wondering is, when so many people go offline, will this cause massive bankruptcies? I mean, you're kind of answering that question, I think, but then will that cause an authorization of aggregation in those states that don't have the current authority, like Arizona, where I live? If so, will it be practical for people to rejoin the grid with fair pricing, potentially, so they can help share excess on the grid and reduce overall impact on global warming?
That would certainly be like a ripe area for future policy work. And already we've seen some disturbing things along the lines of penalizing people for leaving, so you pay whether you use electricity or not, which again I think goes to the fairness of how we kind of set up our grid and the way things are going now.
So if that happens, if people are to potentially rejoining, will their energy quality be good enough to mesh with the grid, or will there be a bunch of systems that are, substandard, that are isolated, that can't rejoin the grid?
As a general rule, all of the grid connected inverters today that can be sold have to meet regulatory approval just to be able to be sold in the US. So unless, I don't know, it was something imported and didn't pass US 50 code, it should be fine. The Canadian restrictions are even worse. so that we can guarantee.
Joshua, I have a quick question for you. I think I heard you say early on, we were kind of chatting at the beginning, that you've taken another look at these numbers and that there actually appear to be more places that it's economic to defect from the grid now. Did I hear you right?
Correct. Yes. So the cost of batteries went down considerably from when we ran the simulations. And so everything was marginal on the paper is probably over the line now. And many things that were, looked like it was 5 years off. Again, the prices have been dropping pretty fast. I put a copy of both a link to the paper so anyone can read it for free and the software. And if you're familiar with Python, you can run it now and do everything that we can do. You can put in your own local prices. If you get a deal on solar panels or something, you can add it in. But we will be trying to release the more user-friendly version as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we have a bunch of questions here. Myron, do you want to go next?
Sure, but I think David raised his hand before me if he wants to do it. I see him hiding behind. David's hand was up first.
Oh, okay. For some reason, yours is showing up first on my list here, but David, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for this presentation. Yes, it's been good and everything. As a person who has been trying to be self-sufficient for the longest time, I have thought about this for many years of how to go ahead and have distributed energy resources facilities being not only resilient, but also be able to go ahead and handle um, and foster a small modular nuclear reactors producing hydrogen and a nuclear communication that is hardened from all hazards, including EMP and geomagnetic disturbances. I think that the best way that I've been able to go ahead and see participating of having regional transmission officer organizations be able to go implement is through a blockchain initiative where they're able to go ahead and sell not only power purchases agreement, but also tax incentive so that it doesn't require them to be connected to the grid themselves in order to sell the power. I think this is the best way to go ahead and get the energy people to go ahead, energy operators to go ahead and participate in this type of resiliency that you're talking about having defected from a decentralized distributed electricity. So thank you for your presentations. I wish you guys very much luck. Until we go ahead and start thinking about resiliency in this current day fair to include all hazards, I don't see us making a dent. Anyway, I didn't have a question, just merely wanted to go ahead and state that, I think the best way to go ahead and mitigate any of this transition that you're talking about from the utility operators is to go ahead and have it a blockchain availability for them. Just my 2 cents.
Thanks, David. I think you brought up a very nice point about using kind of the virtual power plant infrastructure and using blockchain. I put a link to another article that we did where we proposed pretty much what you just discussed, which is software to use a ledger for kind of peer-to-peer trading of energy. And that would potentially cut the utilities completely out of the picture. Or, and this is maybe better if there's anybody from a utility on there, they could run it and then be able to change their business model over. So we did open source software for that too. And to the best of my knowledge, we have the current record for kind of like the gas price, which is how much computational power it takes to run that type of trading scheme. And it's all free and open source, like everything that our group does, so that other people can start to use it and implement it no matter where they happen to be in the world.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Can I, I'm sorry, Lisa, I'm going to skip the line a little bit because
Okay,
I'm going
go
to
ahead,
jump
Kay.
into something that Josh said is 2 things. One about the inverters. There's a lot of like Victron inverters in off-grid equipment that is not going to be certified and is not going to be able to connect to the grid later. So if people have decided to jump off the system completely and cut the cord, they're not going to be able to come back because they're not going to have certified inverters. The second thing,
Kay, you're absolutely right.
the second thing, Josh, is the idea of peer-to-peer. You still have the nasty laws of physics, and peer-to-peer doesn't solve that problem. And operationally, that is a nightmare for another whole system working on a market level, but not taking into account the operational needs and capabilities of the actual grid. So I don't see how you connect those dots.
So I think
I haven't seen a business model for it yet.
well, I'm hoping so. Yeah, and this is hope. So I would hope that utilities, as they see the kind of writing on the wall, they would be the natural owners of that business model, is to enable, and this would be another way to encourage their customers to stay with them, is to enable them to do peer-to-peer trading. And it is virtual, right? So it's not, you don't get the electron of your friend, 20 miles over. You get the electron that's on the grid where you are, but you get the credit And that
How
model,
do you, from an energy standpoint, how do you balance? I have kilowatts. I'm selling on an open market. I have to sell that kilowatt as it's going on to the grid because that's the way the electrons flow. And if there is no willing buyer, you're in my mind, this is me, you're making a ton of complexity. You're actually making the system more complex than less complex.
it definitely is more complex. So the way that you solve that is with the differential energy pricing. So if you're pushing an electron on the grid and there's no buyer, the price will continue to go down until it even becomes negative. And then maybe a battery operator opens up a little bit more potential storage, or I don't know, a manufacturer turns something on that they wouldn't have used unless they were going to get paid to use it.
Well, I don't want to turn into debate. Well, I'm exceedingly skeptical.
Sure.
I have another question for Saeed, but I'll let Myron go.
Okay, thank you, Kay. So the grid defection parameter is multifaceted, and I don't think you're ignoring them, but you weren't mentioning it today. So the rule that I think should encourage regulators to do the right thing is, how does this impact the non-participant if you're going to make any kind of change to how the rules work? And I always presume that if you're going to put in a change, it should lower the price of electricity for everyone. Maybe a much tiny amount compared to the non-participant compared to the participant, but still it lowers the price for the non-participant as well. So with that perception, then you should, I think, look at the question as, what happens when the person grid defects? What does that do to the bills of the non-participant? And then look at the other possibility. What if you pay the potential grid defector to stay on the grid? How does that affect the price of the non-participant? And I argue the second one lowers the price, and the first one raises the price. And that makes it an easy choice for regulators, I think, to do it. Now, not that I found progressive regulators, even in a place that voted 82% blue last month, but regulators seem to be the best. We have the best regulators that money can buy, and that seems to keep them tied to their financiers, namely the utilities. So we don't get good decisions. But if we look at the whole paradigm, not just who can grid defect most easily, but the solution with regulation, so that we can get a positive impact on utility customers who are either left behind when grid defects occur, or have lower bills because grid defects are avoided by good regulation. That's what I think should be part of what you should be modeling.
Myron, I agree. Did you publish your model on how you did that?
Yes.
Is it up somewhere?
Yes,
Okay.
it's there, but unfortunately it's buried in a whole bunch of stuff. It's on my website. I'll show you on my website. I'll also show you where it is published. So I'll put a link to it to me, and you can ask me more questions. I'll put that on the group chat.
Fantastic. And is there any way, are we recording the group chat so that we can go back and look at it later?
Yes, we are recording. Yes.
Perfect.
So it looks to me like Richard is next, if my list is accurate. Does that sound right?
Well, I'll take, sure. So
Okay.
I realize each situation is unique, but off the top of your head, is there a scale? So there are scales of where it makes sense, and scales where it doesn't. So if you go solar on your house, it doesn't really, I mean, that's problematic, but say a city block or a neighborhood or a whole city, or are there, there's different points, works here, doesn't work here, you got to get all the way to here to have it work. And so is there a way, because I live in downtown Vallejo, it's like old downtown, so that it's an old school downtown block. It's just really interesting. It almost looks like a battery. So if you just took the block, there's scales where if you don't have to distribute the power far, if there's not wires to push it through very much, so more localized, but scale. So off the top of your head, are some scales. At what scale does it scale effectively?
That's an excellent question and something we haven't really looked at yet, but it's because we just did residential. But as a general rule, say the cost of a PV system can drop nearly in half when you go from kind of residential to more commercial or industrial levels. And so if you had a close-knit community or maybe a factory with, all the employees around the factory working together, so you had kind of an anchor load and an anchor generation, and then a bunch of small users and batteries, you would absolutely cost less. And you can do that math just on the cost of a PV system dollar per watt from National Renewable Energy Labs.
Google and Apple are doing campus wide. So campus wide is, I guess, effective, and so that would be really interesting or that would be, I think, very useful to have. At least, where do you have to get to have it pay?
Right. Well, and I think the really intriguing part is that I don't think you have to go so right now we already know that a lot of the US is moving to where, you can be micro scale, like you can just be your own house. But if it's 2 houses or a house and a school, then it gets super easy. And then all of these ones that are just on the line fall right over. And if you get something bigger, like, I don't know, a community, a small town or a small city decides that they're going to go all in,
a city block. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yep. No, that's very intriguing.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, looks like next we have Jim Lazar, and then we can jump back to Kay.
Thanks. This is a really fascinating piece of work, and it fits with some stuff that I've done in related areas. My main question is, what is the role of electric vehicles in this? People with home batteries will have 10 or 20 kilowatt hour batteries. People with EVs have 60, 80, and 100 kilowatt hour batteries. And that adds an awful lot of flexibility. I wrote a little piece I'll put in the chat on how in warm sunny climates without much space heating, the EVs will enable more grid defection. But I'm wondering whether you guys modeled it, whether you or others on the call think that that's going to be a big part of grid defection going forward. Thanks.
That's an awesome question. Ellie, do you want to take that and tell them what you're up to?
Yes, sure, Professor. Thank you for this interesting question. So I would like to add that we are currently developing a module for our software, and the main purpose of this software to evaluate and simulate electric vehicles. So there are some electric vehicles like Ford F-150 that you can use that electric vehicle to charge or discharge your electrical load that you have. Also, you can sell the electric vehicle electricity to the grid, or you can buy the electricity from the grid for your electric vehicle. So integrating that electric vehicles with the off-grid system actually can, in my perspective, we are doing still analysis, but from my perspective is that it can increase the profitability of the off-grid system, because rather than having a backup generator, which is polluting as well, we can use our electric vehicle. So if someone has already an electric vehicle, they can use this electric vehicle to compensate for electrical load. And also the excess electricity generated by solar energy system can be used to charge the electric vehicle. So for most of the off-grid solar energy system, there is a great amount of excess electricity generation, and that electricity can be used towards charging the electric vehicle, which is more profitable for the users, for the consumers.
There's one more thing you could do with an electrical vehicle that you didn't mention, which is if your site, your home, your business is running out of kilowatt hours, you could scoot over to Walmart, plug into the DC fast charger, and bring home a load of 80 kilowatt hours, just as you do for milk or potato chips or or beer when you run out of those. And I'm wondering how that provides, to me, that provides a level of security that a stationary battery can't provide.
Absolutely. And then there's a business model on the Walmart side of things. We looked at just the potential of putting up solar canopies over Walmart parking lots. They've already done it in a couple places in the roof of their stores, and they generate far more than they need. And then providing that to their customers free of charge to charge their electric vehicles. And you'd say, well, why would they want to do that? Because if they can keep you in that store to buy one more bag of chips, it more than covers it. And I am really intrigued to do those experiments. So if anybody owns a retail establishment and is interested in doing some solar power charging,
Walmart would have put in 350 kW chargers. They're going to hold them to 50 or 80 or something.
right?
Okay, we can jump back to Kay. And Kay, it looks like you have a question for Lorenzo too. I don't know if you want
Oh no, it's the running comment between Lorenzo and I.
Oh, okay.
We know each other too well, and Lorenzo and I both have to go really quick because we have a GridWise meeting. My question is for Sihid. You talked about multi-objective optimization for your software. How do you search the decision space? So there's a lot of good answers. There's a lot of really, really bad answers in the microgrid world, and there's only a few great answers. So how do you solve the problem of getting into the local minima, but not finding the global minima in price of system design?
Thank you so much for your great question. So currently for optimization, we are using the meta-heuristic algorithms to find the global, and the current optimizer we are using is the PSO algorithm. So we have these decision variables boundaries for that. Like for example, for a residential application, there are some boundaries. So the maximum number of the PVs, for example, is limited. The maximum number of batteries are limited. So the decision space is limited in some aspects. That's one parameter. Another parameter is that we have some constraint on the optimization. Like for example, for the reliability of the off-grid or a hybrid energy system, we have a parameter called loss of power supply probability. So that's one of the constraints. So if any point in the decision space is not satisfying this constraint, it would be out of the space.
That's a common thing. Constraints are one thing versus is within the constraints. How do you limit falling into a local minima? And you said, what algorithm are you using?
Swarm optimization. That's our current algorithm. So I'm
Swarm
working towards.
optimization. Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And also,
on large systems, you're going to have problems with swarm optimization. Let me tell you. We've tried that on bigger problems, and be warned. I got to get to a meeting, so sorry.
So the algorithm
very
that we are
interesting
using. Yeah, thank you so much. So the algorithm that we are using is advanced version of the particle swarm optimization. So yeah, there are some issues with the regular optimizer, but we have actually modified it. So at the current stage for the current system, it's working perfectly without any problem.
On small problems, it will. Yes, definitely. Okay. I'm open. I'm looking forward to seeing the code and diving into it when you release. Thanks.
Okay, we have a lot of chat going on here. I don't see any more hands raised.
I would love to ask a question. This
Fantastic.
Is
Go for it, Dan.
Yeah, hi, my name is Dan Seif. I led the Economics of Grid Defection project at Rocky Mountain Institute in 2014. This research is basically a 2.0 of that 10 years later in the same kind of specific geography analysis of when the cost points cross. I love this report. It's great to see it rehashed. It agrees basically 100% with the 10-year-old analysis by RMI. They had basically imminent grid defection economics in Hawaii and early 2020 economics in California, and then a lot of the rest of the United States following in the late 2020s and 2030s. I think your research is more or less consistent with that. I think what's missing from this story and a lot of the similar research efforts around grid defection or load defection is just how much is actually load defected so far, and that this is not something that is the boogeyman for utilities in 5, 10, 15 years, but is the boogeyman the utility is living next door to quite regularly right now. I'm in Texas. We have thousands of homes that pull less than 5% of their power from the grid. Nationally, it's tens of thousands already. I don't know what the load defection definition is today, but if it's less than 5%, you're talking gigawatts of load already. So this is happening now, and then the acceleration, we just mentioned one car, Ford 150, even though that is the most popular selling car in America, although not the EV model, but that could change. But there will be basically all EVs in 5 to 7 years, two-way capable. That means you have a free battery that is massive, usually above 100 kilowatt hours of energy storage, getting bigger and bigger with every average model year. That's a free battery. That's much bigger than what you would normally install for your home, because you're going to own a car anyway if you're a red-blooded American, probably, unless you're in a few urban pockets. So that massively accelerates grid defection economics throughout the country.
That's right.
So if I would recommend any follow-on research from this great research product, it would be incorporating that, or actually looking at how much is truly load defected to date, which is more of a market analysis than it is a modeling analysis, which might not be, that interesting to you, maybe more interesting to other parties. But and you guys absolutely hit on the head. The last 10 years, I've been thinking and pondering and observing this potential space, and there are all kinds of regulatory burdens to do this. If you cut the cord, what happens to you if you change your mind, all that stuff. But this is not just future price point crossing. It's happening at reasonable volume today. Thanks, appreciate it.
Well, thanks a lot, Dan. Actually, I have a question for you.
Yes,
so
sir.
We absolutely are going to attempt to do the electric battery on the vehicles. It's a very challenging problem, actually, and Ali's on it. Give him a couple more months. And we should be there.
Okay, amazing. Yeah.
But so obviously.
And by the way, RMI is my client. I'm an independent consultant. They've been my client 4 times after I left there.
Okay.
I would love to tie in any future work with maybe some other work. They have a pretty large budget. They pull in $150 million a year. So maybe there's a combined analysis that could be done to bring in more funding to your effort, because I know you still have to pay your bills and not just do interesting things all day long without money coming in. So I'm happy to push on that effort, and I've encouraged them for a long time to do 2.0, and you kind of beat them to it.
And they're more than free to use our software to go 2.1.
Yeah, I love this new software rather than Homer. That is a tricky one. Yeah.
Homer, for those on the call that aren't familiar, Homer was funded by the U.S. government and free and open source in the beginning. And then when they spun it off as a company, the code disappeared. And now we're stuck with something that you can't even fix when you find problems with it, which is why we set some up. But so Dan, what I'm wondering, because I'm very, very familiar with the RMI report, which was excellent. Do you feel like people listen to you? Because when I was on the committee for kind of net metering at the National Academy, they were like, "Oh, you're like, this isn't a real problem." And I was like, "Are you paying any attention to the numbers? It's all right there."
They definitely listened at the time. The Economics of Load Defection report, which came out a year later, details the number of banks that downgraded companies or entire sectors based upon our report, specifically citing our report. Goldman Sachs, Barclays downgraded every utility that they rate, directly citing our report. But now folks have said, oh, that was maybe too much over response, and we've heard about all this grid defection stuff since. I think if people really saw the numbers that have built up over the last decade in truly load defection amounts and really started to see these things, it would get more attention than more forecasting. I love the forecasting, but I kind of realized that people are more scared of the present cumulative reality than they are where things are heading, because that's debatable, right?
Right.
But yes, I mean, you know, Barclays, UBS, Goldman Sachs, they all quite noticed in 2014, but maybe the drumbeat is gone. And I think data centers, which was mentioned on the call, is where the grid defection focus is currently on. You know, I have a couple of clients in that space, and you know, there's talks about, you know, core generation capacity of 2, 3, 4 gigawatt offsite operations, because it takes so long to get this stuff interconnected, and they have to overbuild for sufficient reliability with multiple technologies that they could be fully off grid, and maybe they get grid connected in 5, 7, 8 years, but they will start off grid. That's maybe going to change the equation. I don't know, but that's a long way away from residential. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in because I think Lorenzo has to leave and he has a question. Lorenzo?
Yeah, thanks. Really great informative presentation. I've been talking about grid defection in the policy arena a lot from the perspective of economic justice or energy justice. And I wonder if you're interested in looking at the demographics of who gets to defect and who doesn't, because I'm feeling like what we're developing here is a great methodology for affluent people to escape a grid that an awful lot of people are going to get stuck with. And, energy justice gets talked about a lot these days in the policy arena, but not looking at the practical impacts. What does that mean in terms of outcomes for people? And so the argument I make with policymakers is that if they are creating policies or regulations that essentially punish DER adoption, that make it more expensive, well, all they're doing is increasing the incentives for defection, but making it essentially a luxury good that only a certain proportion of the population can enjoy, which will be affluent homeowners and businesses that are energy intensive and so on. So I'm interested in how do we make grid defection available for everybody? So that even poor people in disadvantaged communities and renters can defect from the grid and get out of the monstrosity of what it's becoming. Thanks.
That's a good question. So I was completely with you up until the very last sentence. So that I think you're right that from an energy justice perspective, we actually should be trying to keep everybody on the grid and be incentivizing distributed generation owners to remain on the grid and provide grid support and all the wonderful services that the value of solar calculations capture. So that in my mind is the best solution, where we maintain a grid and everybody participates, kind of like a federation of microgrids would be the most secure.
Yeah, and that's actually, I agree with you there, because I've been arguing the same thing in the policy arena, that the real solution is to create a transactive marketplace where all of the DER owners can actually participate in economic transactions. They can buy and sell energy, and that creates an incentive to stay connected and participate.
Yep. And then I think kind of that second part of, well, how do we get low-income individuals to be able to participate, because it's very hard, for example, to buy a 10 kilowatt system for your house, a 5 kilowatt system for your house if you don't have access to capital or the ability to get loans. And this maybe goes back to a little bit about Dan's comments about not grid defection, but load defection. And so we do have this concept of plug and play solar, where you have a small microinverter attached to the back of a module and you can plug it in. And in Europe, in many countries, that's totally legal. You can go up to a kilowatt on a single line in your house before it represents any kind of problem. And for the average apartment dweller, 4 modules on your balcony actually could do a pretty substantial amount to your load. When we looked at this before, it was billions of dollars of potential market in the US. And I think that's one of those areas where a very small tweak to kind of national regulations could open that market up, because the technology is there. We would just have to get the current inverter manufacturers to drop down to 120 volts, and they would sell like hotcakes. if they're anywhere near the kind of market prices that they're seeing in Europe.
And the cost would be accessible.
Right. And then you can do one at a time. So you don't need to buy the whole system. You just buy a module, and you give it to your spouse for his or her birthday, and that gets you started on the path.
I love it. That's good.
Great. Okay, so we have John and Myron and Dan. I'm sorry, I kind of cut you and Josh off. If you want to then take it up from there after these two, that would be great.
Hi, thank you, Eliza. Lorenzo, hi, Josh.
Hi, great
Lorenzo,
to see you.
Thank you for bringing up the social justice aspect. In a prior career, I used to, 20-some years ago, I used to lead a global business. I've worked with large enterprises, public and private sector enterprises, to help them design their ability to participate in the grid and to go off the grid if necessary, to be completely independent. I retired from that career and switched my focus to areas of social justice. So thank you for bringing up this point, and became chairman of Habitat for Humanity Sustainability Advisory Committee, where we focused on first helping to build net zero energy homes, though they cost 20% more. The savings towards a disposable income on energy costs more than offset that over the lifetime. So that is one approach to solving the problem, but doesn't scale very well. I did pick up an electrician's license so I could actually help build these homes. I am now, for the last dozen years, now focused as president of an impact investment company, the Swan Impact Network, where we're seeking out startup companies to develop technologies that can go into these lower income resident and small business buildings, lower income residential buildings, to help them at least offset some of their major loads within electrical loads within those buildings, such as the heat pump or a variety of other large loads in that building. And there are some very innovative companies. And I just wanted to mention there's some really interesting technology work going on in addition to public policy work. Thank you.
I'd like to add I'll say it's an invention. I'm not really sure I made it, but I call it hybrid rooftop community solar, where a person has rooftop solar already, based upon a hope for net metering price that wouldn't evaporate over time. Whether or not that evaporates, community solar is coming in many places, including New Orleans. So why not use the excess capacity on someone's home and sell it in a community solar way, which is actually part of this grid defection indirectly, because what's happening is that current net metering, you have no incentive to invest in energy efficiency in your home because you can't get your bill below zero. But with hybrid rooftop community solar, you can invest in energy efficiency, lower your bill below lower your consumption below your production, and sell the excess to community solar subscribers anywhere in the city. It's sort of hybrid or halfway to grid defection, but it provides a pathway there, and it allows people to invest in energy efficiency in their home, which is currently constipated. So I think it's part of the story, and I'm offering it you guys to think about it. I don't know if I invented it, but I certainly have described it and proposed it in the talk I gave at RE Plus in September, and it's also described in some of the websites I put on the web in the description of Prorate.
It's interesting. You'd have to have the kind of virtual metering set up through the utility to allow that, but
no, actually you don't. All you need is a robust community solar rule. So if the community solar is currently viewed almost everywhere in the country as at least the size of a football field or 1/10 that, well, why not have a rooftop as an aspect of your hybrid rooftop array already? You could already have easily more solar than you need by changing your air conditioner, your water heater, and even your washing machine to 1/5 the energy used when you first put the solar panels on. So you can easily generate excess capacity without even buying a solar panel. And therefore, these solar panels become available to create community solar kilowatt hours. All you need is a robust community solar rule to allow this to happen. You don't have to do anything else. You don't need a special meter or anything. I can explain it to you if you want, okay? But it is hybrid to defection, because what happens is once you're doing this and you're allowing people and you're encouraging people to put more energy efficiency in their home, you're producing kilowatt hours available to community solar way faster and in larger quantities than people going out and spending $200 million to build a community solar farm in New Orleans. But we don't have the rules for it. It's a very simple change in rules, but there's no impetus for it because they don't realize our 100 megawatts of rooftop solar that pre-existed any community solar rules is sitting there languishing and not creating those kilowatt hours for poor people and discouraging energy efficiency investments in homes in the rich people. So it's a lose-lose that can turn into a win-win. And it's related to what you're talking about, because someone who's doing that is halfway into grid defect competence. And you're encouraging them to become more grid defect competent, and you're paying them a pittance, not, a half of the price of a kilowatt hour, but it's better than nothing. And you get the more efficiency at the same time.
And it does really nicely by the relative wealthy people that could afford to do the fancier, more expensive, longer payback time, lower ROI energy efficiency improvements.
Right.
So we are now at 1:17. I told you I'd only keep you till 1:15. However, I am more than happy to stay on if any of you want to stay on and keep chatting. I think we were going to jump back to and Ali and Joshua. Can you stick around for a little bit more, or do you have to go?
I'll have to go by 1:30.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm happy to jump in real
can
quick again. You said you might circle back. I just said, look, I've been looking at the space for 10 years and all the grid defection solutions and techno-economics and moralistic and political dynamics that spin out of it. And one, I would say this isn't inherently moralistic. Joshua and Sayed, they looked at techno-economic price convergences and crossovers, right? That's not a moralistic analysis. Two, I don't know anything in the technological space ever that wasn't first adopted by wealthier individuals to put pressure on the market. Solar is a perfect example of that, and it's rapidly come down in average income per adopter. Okay, cell phones, you name tech, right? And if you think about all the entrenched power in utilities and public utility commissioners and the entire system, you really think this is going to get solved bottom up? I do not. I think wealthy adopters saying, I have sovereign property rights and I'm allowed to do this without paying your exit fee because you should have known about all these reality of these economics for 10 or more years, which was the point of that report, by the way, was to put out the call that's the disclaimer that says you cannot 10 years later say you didn't know about these economics when you were approving your 8% per year transmission escalation charges. Which has happened in almost every single ISO and RTO in the United States and Canada, if not at higher rates. While it's scary to think about wealthy adopters adopting first and where that leaves the rest of folks, it's already happening. It's been happening for a decade or more. And that's what eventually puts enough pressure on utility regulators to come up with fairer solutions for the larger economic situations of the population.
And then just something else that if I understand you, Myron, what you were saying was that, say, bang for the buck, that if there were efficiency standards put in, rather than everybody be focused on, building the solar, building the tech, that simply like a major impetus in lowering the load would get people faster to lower bills and reliability than say the big tech build out of all the new tech. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, I want to give Amy Levins a lot of credit for telling us what a megawatt was in 1983.
Exactly.
And it's way cheaper than a battery or a solar panel. And every time we buy something, we're buying nowadays, any one of us in this group and tens of thousands of others are buying negawatts every time we change our appliances. And as we do that, we make the ratio of consumption to production of our solar panels move very rapidly in the direction where we're producing more than we consume, and
Faster,
we're not being paid for it. We're not encouraged to do it, and it's totally stupid. All we need to do is have a healthy community solar rule, and then tell people, if you don't want a healthy community solar rule, look what Joshua and Saeed is telling you. Go down that road and you keep the people on the grid, go down the other road and they get off and everybody loses.
right.
And it doesn't take another device. I don't need another device on my house. I don't need to rewire my roof. The original community solar rule produced in 2019 required you to segregate the solar panels that were going to be used for community solar from the solar panels that you're going to use from your house. I called up an electrician and he told me that cost $10,000. It's a
Sure.
completely nonsense cost because
Right.
nobody cares which solar panel produced the electricity ultimately. And so anyway, this is not hard to do, and we should be doing it. While we discourage it, we slow our transition to a healthy climate.
Myron makes an important point in his work that my solar and my storage is more valuable if it's part of a grid than if it's serving only my own needs.
Right.
And utilities are pushing people, clearly the California proposal to impose fixed charges in the $100 range is pushing people to isolate. And that's the wrong thing to do economically. I don't use all of my storage every day, and I don't use all of my solar every hour. And if the power line's running down the street in front of my house, it's in the interest of my community that I be connected. But utility rate design will cause people to cut the cord. I predict that rural co-ops in sunny places, Arizona perhaps, will be the first utilities to fail because the economics of self-supply are so compelling and the cost of distribution per customer is so high. And co-ops tend to have rate design that, with very high fixed charges makes people choose to cut the cord. But we'll know soon who the first utility to fail is. I mean, before this decade is out, I think we'll see a utility failure from a company that can't adapt to the new world.
Well, I want to give you a little bit of hope, Jim. There's a member of the Electricity Brain Trust. She communicated with me a couple of weeks ago, who is third in line to be the president of the National Rural Electric Association. That's not the name, but that's effectively what she is. And she's communicating with me to help move the policies in the right direction to save the rural cooperatives. And I'm sure you'd be delighted to be helpful. Sorry, I can't remember her name right now, but I'll send you an email with her name. And it's a large number of people are in that world, even though they represent a small percentage. They seem like a small percentage, but she told me a very large number of kilowatt hours are sold through the rural cooperatives of this country. They have a big footprint. And she happens to live really close to Oregon State University. Oregon University that won the national champion right now. So that to give you an idea where it is. But anyway, I'm excited about what you guys did, and I will definitely try to help use this to promote these solutions to my utility regulator. But I want to ask you an interrelated question. We just started a docket in New Orleans about how to deal with dynamic pricing to encourage the utility regulators to create a rate design to allow people to orchestrate their DERs. And I'm wondering whether or not your software can help us get our foot in the door better than we are right now, because we've been promoting prorate in New Orleans it'll be a decade next year with virtually no success, even though they've allowed us to get into almost every docket, because it's relevant to almost every docket. And just maybe what you can do to help us sell it, I'd really appreciate it. Maybe the guy, Dan Seif from RMI, related to RMI, can help us as well, because we're just not getting traction.
That's a more tricky question. Ali, what do you think? Could we use it sort of in reverse instead of?
So currently we have model simulating different utility structures, different rate structures, and in our recent study, which is currently under review, we notified that like the way that these rates are actually designed can encourage or discourage people from defect from the grid. So yeah, so that is our software can be helpful on that. So for example, during the daytime, which the solar energy generation acceleration is a lot, so the rates, the compensations for the people can be higher. So the people are incentivized to actually use DER system. And in this way, so we can design the rates that is more applicable and more interesting for the people to connect their system to the grid rather than defecting the system.
And maybe I misunderstood, but I think, or at least the way I took it, is what Myron was asking is, could we reverse the software? So instead of finding the optimal system for a given condition and a given rate structure, we instead create the optimal rate structure given that kind of like a community load profile and batteries and generation like that. I don't know if anybody's aware of anything that can do that. That might be another PhD.
But yeah, so I think it's actually doable, something doable. So but I like the reverse way of what we are doing currently. So the energy management strategy is already there. We have a novel, sophisticated energy management strategy. We can use that for this purpose, but the way that we are doing the calculation should be reversed. We can do that, I think.
Well, I just want to put on the table as one of your options is bidirectional and time-varying rate design. So my rate design is in the category of variable peak pricing rate design, which means it has a simple step function and has a time of use rate as well. But it's not just pricing that's got two time of use components, but it's also bidirectional. And I think you may not need all of it, but if you have all of it, you've solved almost everything you need to kill grid defection.
Yep. No, that's a really, really good idea. Thank you. No, this has been fantastic. Elise, I really want to thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'd love to jump in one more thing on the grid. There's this sort of assumption here that the grid is always better. I think it certainly is in the short term. There is no evidence whatsoever that it is better 20 years down the road. If you want a postcard from the future, take a look at Australia. It's $200 a megawatt hour for the average residential person to pay for the grid. At some point, the wires are just way more expensive than endlessly cost-reducing batteries and solar, especially when they come free in the car you're going to own anyway. So the assumption that the grid is always better is a false assumption if you project far enough into the future.
Exactly, Myron. Yes.
Yeah. Now, today's issues are today's issues, but I always see this argument, the grid is always better. The grid is most definitely not better in any longer-term analysis I've ever seen. And I think I'll drop out there, but this has been super fascinating, and I appreciate everybody's comments. Great discussion.
Oh yeah, Ken just want to Ken Colburn gave us the name of the person who's the leader in the rural cooperative. Her name is Ingrid Kessler. It's in the chat session. And I had direct communications with her. She gave me a thumbs up in some of my posts in the ABT. So she's a real asset to affect that segment of the electric grid. Thank you, Ken.
Sure, Myron. I would just note that she is the third in line on the board leadership. She's not yet the leader of the board at NRECA. And one always has to keep in mind, of course, that with a 48-person board, NRECA is unsurprisingly a staff-driven organization as opposed to a board-driven organization. That said, we'll take traction wherever we can find it, right? And Ingrid appears to be one of those. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you everybody for coming. And Ali and Joshua, oh my God, great presentation, wonderful Q&A, truly appreciate it. I'll be writing about this on the site. We will put the presentation up for everybody to re-look at, and the full conversation will be in the community. So again, thank you. And this is our last live stream for this year, but come back in January. There'll be lots more interesting discussions.